everybody. Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry for this delay. We are without our technician, and Naya here is kindly stepping in. We're really grateful, but the camera is new. She is a student of Academy of Film, Theatre, etc. And she's a camera girl, but nevertheless, I'm really happy and grateful, but technical problems. Anyway, since we are delayed, I'm going to wrap it up and no proper introduction, but what I do have to say is that in November 2009, we organized the first public debate at this department. So tonight we are celebrating the 10th anniversary, and this is pretty cool. And so the 11th of November, the Memorial Day of the military. Hence this, I mean, not because of that, because this is sort of a provocative a little bit, and it's questioning our attitudes towards war, which makes me think of Virginia Woolf. If anybody has read Three Guineas, I wanted to tell you a little something about it. I won't. We move on, because she was quite an ingenious, crazy woman. They say ingenious as far as I'm concerned. We are not where she had hoped at the time we would be. We are not there. We do not adopt the kind of attitude towards war that would lead to peace. We have collectively, obviously, but accepted war as a necessary evil. So if we start from this premise, war as a necessary evil, perhaps the best or the only thing we can do is we can we can erode the system from within. Hence this sort of motion. And the debaters who are going to attack the motion tonight are on the side government. Nusha, as always, our Prime Minister. She's your colleague, a student of English. A quick one. Helena, another one stepping in. Helena she's going to adopt the role of Deputy Prime Minister. Helena from the Faculty of Social Sciences. And Peter, our older students know him. He's been with us for 5 years. He's the 6th year medical student. Anyway, you can just wave, don't be so arrogant. Okay, another medical student, leader of opposition, Lucia, second row. That's her. And deputy man, Ivan, he's been with us also for quite a while, older student of social sciences, and the third social sciences student, Isa. She's going to wrap up the debate tonight. And that's it. At the end, I hope there's enough oxygen in this room that we can have the sort of informal follow-up, as we very often do. Before we start, Nusha will quickly walk you through the format, and during the debate, just enjoy it. Take notes as well. See you tomorrow. Thanks.
Okay, hands up who hasn't been to a debate yet. Okay, we have to do this. Okay. Who has never seen a debate here? Not here, like in life. Okay. Don't be alarmed by anything you see. They are behaving okay for debaters, but they're still going to make a lot of sounds you would not expect in a civilized discussion. Okay? They will be banging on the tables. This is not meant to confuse you, do not make you hear things. This is meant as they strongly agree with what the person is saying and cannot contain the joy. Okay? So if you don't hear what the person is actually saying, that's why we have Naya. Sometimes during our speeches, the other team will stand up and try to ask us questions. Madam. Like this. Again, do not be alarmed. This is normal. I'm also perfectly allowed to just sit him back down if I don't feel like taking his question. Okay. So what will happen is we'll interchangeably present our arguments, hopefully engage with material the other team brings up, so you will be able to follow what we do. Okay? Any questions on what the general format is? You should have. You should have some, because I have not mentioned how long the speeches are. You're not going to be here till 10, right? Speeches are 7 minutes, and during the first and last minute, we will not be taking any questions from the debaters. If you guys have any question during the debate, write it down, okay? Because you will not remember at the end of the debate, okay? And we would really like to have a discussion with you afterwards. Okay, now for, since I'm given this platform, I feel like I'm welcome to invite you all to our weekly sessions. If you are interested in debate, if you want to develop your critical thinking, if you just want to improve your essay writing, if you want to improve on how you perform at oral exams, join debate, it helps, it's great. Wednesdays, 6 p.m., University headquarters at Contention, okay? If you did not remember this, either now or find us on Facebook. We live in the 21st century, it's fine. Okay.
Or talk to your teachers.
Or talk to your teachers, yes. They're also, they know where to find us. Or just generally find me, I'm here always. Okay, so no questions about general debate stuff? Then we'll start. Okay, there's a war going on somewhere, and we just don't seem to care about it. What we on site government are trying to do here is, with this change of narrative, we're trying to change our attitudes towards war as a concept. What we will do is, because we believe if soldiers are seen as heroes, that means that war is seen as something different than it actually is. We believe that if heroes fight in a war, then war is better than us. War is something that's not meant for us, for the general public. War is righteous. War is sometimes even maybe holy. And we believe on site government that this is a narrative that definitely has to be challenged. So what we on site government decided to do this time is we'll present basically the same argument, which is this is bad, from 3 different points of view. I'll present, we decided to go with our fields of study, so I'll deal with a bit about how language affects us. Nina will talk about international law and legal stuff I don't understand. And Peter will tackle a bit about medical issues, PTSD, this time, surprisingly not debate related. Okay, so you guys are the last group of people I need to tell that language shapes the way we see our world. So here is why we come to my first point, which is we somehow need to define a few things in this motion. And this is, who even is a hero? We believe that cultural literature, general life tells us that heroes are people who do selfless actions, who go beyond and above what they're supposed to do to help others. They are willing to sacrifice their own selves, their own benefits to promote others. We believe that they are usually morally very strong characters, not generally aligned with anything, but they have a general moral center.
Question.
Yeah.
Was Achilles a hero?
In his own sense, maybe. But we believe that his general existence still does not prove anything good for our society. First problem we must tackle now is who actually is a hero, because we can either view heroism as an identity, or we can view it as a set of actions we do as individuals. And both of those narratives have a problem. If we view heroism as an identity, this means that every action, if I identify myself as a hero, that means every action I do is heroic. And there is an inherent problem here, because people cannot be good all the time. And soldiers returning from the war usually do not see themselves as heroes, so they do not self-identify as ones, but they feel like heroism is a role forced upon them by the society. And it is very hard for them to rebel against it, because they see other soldiers coming back as heroes, because they see how hard they fought. So we believe that it's generally just better to scrap the entire concept of heroism for their own health. And if we see heroism as a set of actions, we believe that heroism, to be heroic, it's never really heroic to suspend moral responsibility to do anything. And because soldiers are technically not allowed to disobey orders, there are even sanctioned if they do. We believe that this clashes directly with our point of their moral clarity. And who is a hero matters in the sense of, are only our soldiers heroes? Are the other side heroes? Are they both heroes? Because there is a problem on all sides here. And who decides who is a hero can be very problematic, and you as a group of people stemming from the Balkans are the last group of people I need to tell about what happens when one group decides who's a hero and who was the enemy in a war. Okay, so now let's talk about how narrative shapes attitudes. So how we see war. We on our side believe that it's not actually important if this glorifying soldiers means that there will be more or less war. What's more important is to examine how it affects how we view war as is. We believe that if we view soldiers as heroes, so people who participate in the war as heroes, we view war as an idolized version of itself, something we find fascinating, something we find curious, something we're interested in, but like in an almost perverse way. Not something we're critical of, but something we want to know, we either ignore completely or want to relive in a sort of removed way.
Madam.
War is also miraculously now clean because heroes are not able to perform bad actions, right? Which is completely divorced from reality. And now we need to talk about the language we use when talking to soldiers and talking about soldiers. Because we believe that the status of hero actually diminishes the empathy we feel towards soldiers. And we, on side government, we're not evil people. We believe that soldiers should have rights. They should be respected as human beings at some point. And we believe that we should view them as, we should sympathize with them as much as we can. So how is empathy actually achieved? It's achieved by trying to find ourselves in another person, by reflecting, by finding this overlap we all share as a humanity. And a hero, by definition, is someone above us, someone we share no traits with. This creates this gap we cannot bridge, which means that if we can't find that overlap, that means that we cannot empathize with them, we can never understand them, which means we otherify them, which is a problem in its own sense. And also it means that I, because I'm nothing like that, can never be a hero. And that leads in not understanding, not empathizing with them, inherently leads to bad policy outcomes in two ways. One, that's bad for soldiers. This is self-explanatory. I view them as heroes. They don't need my help. They need a parade. They don't need healthcare. Second point, which is bad for society. This means accountability, because bad politicians present bad bills, which get passed, because there is funding for the troops inside the bills. They are passed without any sort of overlook, because we as not soldiers, not heroes, cannot afford to stand against the troops. We cannot afford to take a stand. And this side, on side government, we believe that we should vote against bad bills, even if they harm the military. Okay?
Thank you, Nusha, thank you, Prime Minister, and I invite the Leader of Opposition to continue the debate on opposition. Yeah, if you manage to get measles?
Okay, thanks. Hvala, sorry.
V bistvu lahko dva zdaj sedete, sem ko bude na drugi strani.
our position, we believe that heroes can still exist in an unjust world. Just because they are victims of circumstance does not mean that they cannot be heroic and that it is not good for them to be perceived as heroes. What's going to happen in our oral speech? Firstly, a couple of disclaimers. Secondly, a couple of negations. And then thirdly, my argument about how heroism is especially important for the individual soldier. Ivan is going to talk about how heroism is important for the concept of war and how war changes when you don't have the concept of heroism. Okay, the disclaimers. Firstly, we believe that without heroism, the situation would be even worse in all situations. Secondly, we think that war happens either way, right? War happens on their side, war happens on our side. The question is, where is war better? Where is war something that we can mitigate better? We think that this is the scope of the debate that we need to talk about. And then thirdly, we think that we can tie heroism to honor, because when people self-identified or have a pushed identity on them of heroes, they are much more likely to make actions that would fit that criteria. Thus, we think that identifying them as heroes can also mean that they make actions that are of honor. Okay, no, negation. Firstly, we think that their whole idea about how now war is something that is bigger than us and how war is something that we cannot challenge is bullshit, right? Because firstly, we think that the identity of soldiers and the concept of war are separate. You never think of soldiers when you're thinking of a war. However, you are going to be more likely to be for something when you have a feeling that people are doing their best. Secondly, about heroes. Nusha tells you that heroes need to have a strong moral code and that heroes have to have a strong moral character. Soldiers have to disobey their commanders if they think that they are pushing them to do something that is a war crime. To do something like that, especially in a hierarchical society such as the military, requires you to have a strong moral compass and to have a strong moral character, so they lose on their own definition, right? Thirdly, about the us and them narrative, this is not exclusive to heroism, right? Everything that they talk about is not the product of viewing soldiers as heroes, but it is rather the product of having war, right? They never managed to tie the concept of heroism to the concept of war and how it worsens it. We think we do that on our side. Moreover, we think that it is not true that we don't condemn war. Every day we hear news articles and we hear politicians speak about how war is bad. Every day society says war is bad. Moreover, we think that the separation of soldiers from war, so war can be bad, but soldiers can be good and even victims, is very prevalent in our society. For example, in Vietnam, soldiers were perceived as victims of circumstance while the war itself was still perceived as something evil. We don't think this is exclusive. And now, lastly, about empathy, right? Just because you can't identify with someone doesn't mean you can't empathize with them. I cannot identify with the life of a migrant, yet I still can empathize with their situation. We think that A, it is better for them to have a parade than to have nothing. And secondly, we think that on our side, it is much more likely that you do get healthcare. Because on their side, the alternative is either A, not caring about soldiers, or B, being negatively predisposed to soldiers, which means that they get less healthcare opportunities and they get less care after they come out of war. We think we win that. On policy, we think it happens either way, because it doesn't happen because soldiers are heroes, it happens because war is perceived as something necessary. Our argument. Firstly, is it just to take away their identification as heroes? We don't think so. Because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, war is still something that is necessary. War is still something that will happen, and these people are still providing a social service, right? Even though it might be morally questionable to kill another being, at the end of the day, they are still doing something for the greater good of the society and for what they perceive is something that will strengthen their nation and strengthen what they're doing. They have to be repaid for the sacrifice of them being of them being ready to sacrifice their life for something that they perceive as good. Go.
Would you say that suicide bombers are willing to sacrifice their life for the greater good in terms of their cause?
They sure are. However, we think that there's a huge difference between suicide bombers and heroes, because suicide bombers often act on their own accord in order to spread fear. Soldiers, more often than not, are just pawns in a greater game of a country that is trying to establish their dominance. We all think that the invasion of Iraq was bad. However, we cannot unequivocally say that all of the soldiers in that invasion were bad, right? So firstly, we think that just because they're willing to sacrifice like their life for something that they perceive as necessary, we think that we cannot take that sacrifice away from them. Secondly, we need to talk about what happens to soldiers when they get back from the field, right? Because those soldiers need support. Often they have PTSD because they have seen gruesome things that they cannot forget. We tell you that this PTSD and this despair worsens when they feel that all of their actions were in vain, that all of their actions were bad, and when society tells them that they are social pariahs and should never be reintegrated back, right? So we tell you that you're already worsening the situation that these people are in. We think this is abhorrent no matter what their actions were, right? We tell you that no human being deserves to be essentially thrown away by the society simply because they did something that they perceived as societally good. Thirdly, we tell you we get more money for soldiers simply because people are more likely to empathize with them, people are more likely to feel like the medical care for the Vietnam veterans is necessary, right? We tell you that we build a necessity for their care. Thirdly, we need to talk about how do we oppose war. We tell you that soldiers have a unique capital to oppose war because they have seen it and they have experienced it. They are seen as a legitimate actor to say this is bad and this should not happen. If we take that away, we also take away an important actor in stopping things that we consider bad. The movement against war in Vietnam only grew strong when soldiers from Vietnam started returning, said, you know guys, this is really bad what's happening there, we need to stop it, and because they were perceived as victims of that situation. That's when the push on the society, on the government happened, that's when we got change. Lastly, we think that war happens either way because it is not contingent on heroism, and the question is how do you get people to fight? We tell you it is much better if you have heroism because then you get people who fight by choice rather than people who are forced to, and that's how you get, less, more questionable moral characters in there because they don't need the perception of heroes to be soldiers. Because it is bad for soldiers and because it is bad for war, oppose.
Good luck with that.
And I'm calling Helena to continue the speech for side government.
Okay, firstly, what the side of the opposition tries to picture for you is the world where Achilles is the same as Mark from Colorado that is now fighting in Syria, is actually fighting in Syria, that those heroes are the same thing. That's what basically Ivan tried to make Nusha tell you. I will explain that later on. Okay. Firstly, in my speech, I will do some of the rebuttal that is needed to do on the Lucia speech, and secondly, I will talk about how this basically provides some accountability for the politicians and how basically this influences the whole discourse in the politics. Okay, firstly, negation. Lucia comes up and tries to picture us the world where actually this war happens either way. Happens in the side of the proposition, happens in the side of the opposition. Okay, firstly, we agree with that. But even if that is true, the war that happens on the side of the opposition, it's much bigger, has more harm than good for the society. And for that, the war that happens on the side of the proposition, when we stop portraying the soldiers as heroes, we will have the decline in actually wars and also in the public discourse that I will talk later on. Secondly, Lucia tries to say to us that yes, the people, the soldiers actually have the responsibility to disobey when countries are doing like war crimes. Lucia, that's completely wrong. Soldiers didn't do that in Srebrenica. Soldiers didn't do that in Rwanda. Soldiers didn't do that anywhere. Now, even if they do it, the majority of the people are still trying to fight for their country, for their military. And even if now Ivan will come up and try to make some extension about how this happened in Srebrenica, yes, maybe 1% of the soldiers did it, but the other 99% of the soldiers that are important in the whole, that are important in this thing, didn't do that. No, thank you, Ivan. Okay, moving on to their first argument. Here, Lucia tries to picture us the world where actually these soldiers are doing the social service for us. They are doing something great for us. But then she actually says, okay, they are doing some morally questionable things. Yes, they are doing morally questionable things, they are doing bad things, and for that, because of the sake of the society, we cannot picture them as heroes. We cannot picture someone that is killing, actually, that is bombing the whole society, that is bombing the countries, that is bombing basically innocent kids in Syria. We cannot picture them as heroes. We can just, as the society, we have the responsibility to not picture them. No, thank you. To not picture them as heroes. Secondly, no, thank you. Then actually, how with this that we picture them as with that heroes, we repay them back actually for their social service. We believe that we can. No, thank you. That we can actually repay them with other things. For example, with giving them, after they retire, giving them money, giving them healthcare. Not with picturing them as the heroes because they kill a bunch of people in Syria. That's not the right, no thank you, not the right way. Okay, then to suicide, Para makes a question about suicide bombers and soldiers. Yeah. Are they, no thank you, are they heroes also, the suicide bombers as soldiers? We say that yes, in their mind it's the same thing. They are both perceived as heroes for basically the people that they do it for. So it's basically the same thing. Okay. Then, no thank you. What happens with them after coming back? This is the direct negation will be in Para's third speech where he will explain it, what happens with soldiers after they come back with some medical stuff. Okay, and how do we oppose war? We believe that in our side, what is going on their side is that now people, the countries, when the soldiers come back, are perceived as good soldiers that were fighting against bad countries, that were fighting against basically bad people in their society. We don't buy that because we believe that now that the USA was not fighting bad people in Syria. USA was not fighting the bad people in Vietnam. That is not the right, no thank you, way to perceive people. Okay, now to our argument. About the accountability, but before that, Ivan really seems to disagree.
Isn't it, without honor, the standard for soldiers to kill children? Isn't the concept of honor the counterpoint to soldiers just being like killing machines?
Okay, no, you're wrong. Because these soldiers are actually killing those innocent people. They are actually killing those people, and we believe that we should not portray them as heroes in any way. It's not like legitimate in any way. Now, back to my argument. Argument about accountability. Firstly, political accountability. First point about heroes and average citizens. What happens basically in the political discourse? Okay, first thing is that we are treating soldiers as heroes. And then we have on one side the soldiers that are heroes, and on the other side we have like average citizens, everyone who is not military is average. This creates some kind of tension in the society because military issues constantly take first place and issues of average people are not so relevant in the society. Politicians understand that and shape their speeches and basically strategies around it. They shape their strategies, their speeches around the discourse about the military. Secondly, politicians use discourse about veterans, about soldiers that came back from wars and military to distract the voters from other issues, allow basically the hierarchy to be created. When politicians try to avoid problems that are relevant for the general society, they always come back basically to creating the discourse about the military, about the war veterans. Okay, when politicians, basically, this happened with medical care. It's a big problem in the USA, but politicians try to shape it that way, that we were talking only about the medical care of the soldiers. It enables them to basically appear good and gracious because they did take basically care of the part of the problem that was the medical care of the soldiers, but they didn't make like the general good things. Okay, you get more political points for helping veterans than for helping average people. And this is one of the problems when we portray soldiers as heroes. Secondly, we need talking about how this enables the politicians to legitimize their worst political decisions by saying their policies benefit the veterans, their policies benefit the soldiers. For example, Trump pulling out of Syria to protect the troops from staying there too long. For example, pulling funds from Planned Parenthood to subsidies for veterans. That's an example of that, how they try to like shape the whole political discourse, how they try to shape the whole their bad decisions into, okay, we are now doing something good for our heroes, we are now doing something good for our soldiers. Because soldiers are heroes and average people are not. The fair view of these policies is impossible, because if you say, okay, this is not good, why are we helping soldiers? They will say to you, yes, but they are our heroes, because the subject of the policies are not the same. The average people and the soldiers are not the same thing in the discourse. Okay, and basically accountability in the military first during the missions, accountability for misbehavior, brutality towards civilians or prisoners. It takes long time and a lot of issues to pile up to actually hold individuals accountable. That almost never happens. Have you seen like, there are many examples where people were actually writing about how soldiers were misbehaving in the military, were doing bad actions, but nothing actually happens. We have a lot of examples of this in the American army. Why? Because they are heroes and are morally superior, and they are always right. Okay, and then secondly, around the missions, issues like human trafficking and smuggling of drugs, that happens in the military. That happened in Vietnam. That happened in Afghanistan. These topics are rarely discussed between like politics. And saying that soldiers are heroes takes away even more of the victims' like legitimacy, because the soldiers are without flaws. And because of all of these reasons, please vote proposition.
Thank you, Helena. Ivan, the floor is yours now.
Yeah.
You can say everything.
Pa po mojem je lažje tam, ker so se zdaj maknili. All right. Before I start my speech proper, one big life lesson, okay? 90% of the time, when you're arguing with someone and it feels like a brick wall and you're not going anywhere, it's because that person is not acknowledging the other side of the argument that they're making. And this is the problem with side government today, right? Because they don't acknowledge the fact that they will need to live in a world where there is no honor in the military. They will need to live in a world where soldiers are simply killing machines, okay? And that is a world we don't want to live in. If there was no war, if there was no conflict, if there were no evil countries around the world, we need to kind of try and stop from doing evil things. Sure, I'll take it. But in a world where we have the military, in a world where we need to sometimes use force for good, okay? We cannot have a military that is without honor. And I'll explain why in my speech, okay? So the first thing we need to tackle, okay, is this idea from side government that killing babies in Iraq is viewed as an honorable thing. Okay? It's not. Even this is disingenuous. Even in the most radical, redneck southern parts of the US, where the military is above all, okay? they don't show killing of civilians as an honorable deed that should happen. Okay? And that's the worst case example I'm making here. Okay? The point being that it is the concept of honor that is the counterpoint to killing civilians. Okay? It is the fact that it is not okay to simply, as a soldier, go around and murder everyone is a key element of honor, a key element of heroism. Because you sacrifice yourself for the good of others. No, thank you, Michelle. And this, no, thank you. This portrayal of soldiers as killing other people is simply doesn't exist. Okay, it's disingenuous to make such a characterization. No, thank you. What does this mean? This means that it is the concept of honor itself which is a counterpoint to such actions. Okay, it is when the American public found out what the soldiers were doing in Abu Ghraib, right, that the problems for the American military started. It is when the public found out what their honorable soldiers were doing, okay, that the issue started. Without the concept of honor, it wouldn't have been such a problem because everybody would kind of expect that there are people with guns, they're going to shoot people. That's what happens, right? If we don't have the standard of honor in the military, no thank you, that's when we get casualties, and I'll talk more about that later. Then you give the example of Srebrenica. What was the problem with Srebrenica? People running away was the problem. The Dutch running away, the Dutch not being honorable, the Dutch not honoring the code that they swore themselves to. It's the fact that people were not honorable, that people were not heroes, that Dutch soldiers saved their lives instead of saving the poor Bosniaks who were imprisoned there, that caused the issues in Srebrenica. If you look at literally any war crime in the history, it was dishonorable behavior, dishonorable soldier that caused it. And without a standard to hold them up to, things simply become worse. But Helena would disagree.
Yes, of course I disagree, because I believe that in the majority of the cases, these things still happen. They are still killing innocent people, but we don't portray that. We still portray them as heroes that are protecting our country, but we don't make problems because they are killing other people.
And this is the problem. This is the problem I started with today. If we have a world without war and without conflict, sure. But if we have one with it, you need to show your examples in such a world where conflict happens. So what you need to show me is not a non-military, no conflict happening. It is a conflict zone where soldiers perceive zero accountability, perceive zero concept of honor, have zero idea of themselves as heroes. We think that is a worse world to live in. Okay? Why specifically, though? If I move on to my argument, before that, a quick reprisal of what Nina said at the end, right? First of all, like how politicians make bad decisions because the concept of like honorable veterans exists. First of all, we think it's disingenuous to say that veterans don't deserve the healthcare and social services they get. Okay? Just because the USA has a shitty system where they don't have enough money to provide condoms and like basic medicine doesn't mean that it's bad to provide basic medicine to veterans. Okay? So they need to tell us which exactly this like over-the-top medical services veterans get in the USA that they don't deserve. But second of all, the alternative is that we have a group of people in our society who were trained to be killing machines, who are completely segregated, and social zombies who get zero help, zero healthcare, zero assistance. We think that's a worse society to live in. Again, they do not look at the comparative, they do not look at the world they need to live in if they defend this motion. So why is honor so important as a concept of war, right? We think honor and the concept of heroism are important wartime safety mechanisms. Okay? A big reason why honor became such an important element of war is that countries couldn't afford to lose their entire farming populations. Okay? If we look back at military history, okay, think of the worst like military defeat or military engagement you can think of. Okay? Like for those not so versed in military history, it's like Epirus and the Pyrrhic victory. Right? So an example of a victory so problematic with so many casualties that it completely destroyed the state. Okay? The casualty rate in that battle was 10%. Okay? So 10% of the people who went to war died, and this was such a catastrophic loss that the state collapsed. Okay? Because of such examples, states introduced the concept, and society introduced the concept of war, of honor into war, so that people didn't just go and stab each other to death, but it was more like a tug of war who can like overpower the other guys, make them run away. Okay? And it's important to have this in war so that we don't devolve into mindless like meat grinders, which we had in the First and the Second World War. Right? It is the abandonment of honor, of heroism, which caused these like huge issues. Right? It was gas bombs, artillery shelling, snipers, plane bombing, etc. Right? These were the massive killers of those wars. And these are perfect examples of such non-honorable, heroic warfare. Okay? And the point I'm trying to make here is that if we have a war without honor and without heroism, we have a war whose only objective, basically, is to murder, is to grind down the opposition. Okay? And we don't like heroic wars. Okay? But non-heroic wars without honor are worse. And this is what side government needs to defend, and that's why we beg to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for this impassioned speech. I think the passions are going to grow high. Yeah, you need to leave.
Sorry.
Thank you. Right. Peter, the floor is yours.
I'd like to start by sharing a thought by one of the greatest thinkers of our time. Wars not make one great. I am naturally referring to Master Yoda from The Empire Strikes Back. And much like Luke Skywalker took guidance from Master Yoda, so too would side proposition like all of you to take guidance from his wise words. Now, a few points of contention within this debate before I wrap it up by telling you why the hero narrative specifically also harms veterans and troops returning from wartime situations. Right. First things first, on the argument from side opposition that war does not equal the soldiers, that we can somehow divide the narratives of hating war but loving the soldiers. We tell you that in theory this sounds great, but in practice it's not what happens, right? In most Western countries, or in most countries that propagate war or have a heavy military presence, what you get is the political discourse and media making it tied together, right? Because of this argument that both Nusha and Nena talked about, right? Because we tie war to the soldiers. We tie getting funding to the lives of the soldiers, to the troops who are going to need our support, right? When we talk about in public discourse about certain actions that our country has undertaken in another country, what's going to happen is it's going to be followed by a fluff piece about the soldiers also building a well for like puppies or something, right? So what you get in practice is the essential tying together of these two narratives, right? Because you also have to get funding for war, and you get it by tying these two narratives together. Secondly, on Ivan's very impassionate yet completely unrelated speech to this debate, what we need to very clearly define is the difference between like honor and essentially basic military law and the narrative of heroism in today's society, right? We tell you, of course, like Nusha's entire argument about how the narrative of heroism is propagated within society and within the soldiers' own heads, meaning that you feel like, as a soldier, you're doing something great for your country, for your cause, you're willing to die for that cause, has nothing to do with honor in the military, right? Suicide bombers think that they're doing the heroic thing in fighting for what they believe in. The countries or the places where they come from will show these suicide bombers and terrorists as heroes fighting for what is right. At the same end, you have stuff like what happens in the States where you have soldiers killing like civilians and still being shown in their own minds and by society as heroes. No. So that's the first problem, right? Secondly, we tell you that you can, because of this hero narrative, every single army has a specific hero narrative about their own soldiers. And the hero narrative, most importantly, is also set by the winner of a specific conflict, which completely does not allow for any sort of reparations or healing past a time of conflict, right? Take Yugoslavia after World War II, where nobody was allowed to talk anything bad about the partisans, and we're still having discussions because of unacknowledged crimes, because they were untouchable, and you couldn't talk about the misdeeds that they might have done. Thirdly, we tell you that it also otherfies the soldiers within their own heads. That's the way you get someone to kill another person, is by distancing them from a normal human being. You make them a hero also within their own minds, right? That's why the shit that happened in Vietnam happened, why Abu Ghraib happened, because you managed to create a soldier with an internalized hero narrative that was sort of brainwashed into believing that they're doing it for their country and for their freedom and whatever. So we tell you that this essentially creates killing machines. Thirdly, or fourthly, whichever point I'm on, we tell you that because of the hero narrative, and as Nena has already explained to you, it's very hard to get sanctions, right? So yes, there was a change after Abu Ghraib leaked out. We tell you that we could have more change towards a less aggressive type of warfare and have more accountability for the soldiers that are doing atrocious deeds in the name of our own country, if we were allowed to speak more openly about them without receiving backlash from a large portion of society about how you're not allowed to talk bad about the troops because they're sacrificing their lives and whatever, right? So because these two narratives are inherently tied together, and because you get them in both societal and individual ways, we tell you it discourages any sort of accountability and also leads to abuse for like bad policy decisions, which you're again not allowed to criticize because you're not allowed to criticize the warriors. And also thirdly, just like, you know what keeps people from killing babies? Like military law. I don't know. So, moving on to our argument, right? So this directly engages with Lucia's material. So why is it also bad for the troops? Firstly, because this the troops come back to a society that embraces this narrative to make, so the narrative of heroism is not only used for like gaining political brownie points with mostly conservative parties, it's not only used to sort of shirk accountability for shit that you did in another country, it's also used by society to make some sort of narrative sense of what other people are doing in your name. So you come back to a society that uses this narrative. As a soldier, you're viewed as a highly, yeah, sure.
Is it easier to get accountability when someone that you perceived as honorable and someone that you perceive is heroic does something that is abhorrent, or is it easier to do that in a society that
it's absolutely easier in the other way, because if the majority of soldiers as a blanket concept are viewed as heroes, attacking one is perceived as an attack on the entire collective, and they're untouchable in that. So if like soldiers were regular sisses and bros hanging out in society, like policemen, like firefighters, we say individual accountability is much easier because they don't have this collective shield. Now, because these individuals, when coming back, are viewed as like having highly prized personal qualities, doing uncommon sacrifices for the greater good, and fighting evil and voluntarily and at great risk, they return to a society that rejects anything outside of this hero narrative, right? They don't want to see it, they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to know how many people you shot, right? They just want to see the stars and stripes and the parades and the marching bands. What happens is society also demands of you to conform to that narrative, and you, in a sense, also want to conform to that narrative because it's bred into you through society and through military training. Now, this discourages soldiers from speaking openly about their trauma because heroes can't be traumatized. Heroes have to be essentially untouchable. What this means is they have a harder time psychologically asking for help, admitting that they have a problem from all sides. And if you couple this with like the military's propensity for like hegemonic masculinity that puts a heavy emphasis on like self-discipline, self-reliance, aggression, you get a world where they don't get to process the trauma. You get a world where the lifetime risk for developing PTSD in someone who's seen combat is over 30%, where the suicide rates are a lot higher than the general population, where you have anxiety, depression, alcoholism, and all of these issues that you can't really deal with in a world where you still have 2 million American vets going without basic health insurance, let alone psychological counseling, because no one wants to hear about your trauma. You're a hero. You don't get to be traumatized. So, at the end of the day, we tell you that valuing a necessary contribution of soldiers is not the same as heroism. We tell you that honor is not the same as heroism, and that the narrative of heroism only serves to harm both the soldiers and the wider society.
Thank you, Peter. And now Isa will conclude the debate for side opposition and also conclude the entire debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can abhor the war that is happening and yet still respect the men that die in it. I believe that so can everyone else. These are two separate concepts. And we see this constantly in society, even in America, right? Where they do have this great veneration for their soldiers, the heroes, the martyrs that die in war, right? We still see that they are able to go against the terrible wars and atrocities that happen, that they have checks and balances when these wars happen, that society does not willingly go along into every war suggested by the politicians, right? And we believe that these are two separate things. What this debate is about is exactly how this narrative affects what happens in war. We believe that war will happen either way, but we have to look at what happens to the soldiers and what happens to society in these cases. So for this speech, I'm going to summarize what happened in this debate, right? So firstly, I think it's wise to talk about the soldiers, right? The people who do die in these wars, the people who are the victims as well. So when we're talking about what happens when they come back, right? This idea of us not being able to empathize with them because they're heroes is completely ridiculous. Who are the characters we empathize with movies, right? They are the heroes of those stories. Heroic qualities are what we want to see in ourselves, what we want to see in other people. It is what we identify as. These are the people we help. Not if we see them as killing machines, as in the alternative. We would not give them support. We would not want to listen to their problems and their, traumas that they have. What is important here is that if we see them as heroes, they have the legitimacy to ask for help. In society, they're giving the funding to, for instance, more so than the rest of society, have the ability to get healthcare. They are listened to, they are respected. Their input, even about war, is respected. And that is exactly what is important. We would not like to see the alternative, where men who sacrifice their lives and their futures, right, are not treated as they have made a sacrifice for that country. We don't believe this is justified at all. We believe that seeing them as heroes helps them in society, right? Because they have internalized this, right? And even if they have these problems, society will be able to reintegrate them because there's an interest. They're heroes, they're people who have fought for their country, right? This idea changes when we stop perceiving them as people who are, who are worthy of our, empathy, who are worthy of our help. And that is why we believe that we do not otherize them. We actually integrate them further, and we provide help for these people. The second thing is, let's talk about the general narrative that happens in society, right? Let's look at a reality check. We believe that, yes, many times the soldiers, the troops, are used as talking points by politicians, right? But we don't believe this would change in any other way, right? This idea that they said, for instance, in the beginning, is that if we didn't perceive them as heroes, right, the politicians wouldn't be able to persuade people as efficiently into going into war. Bullshit, right? Fear-mongering does that. Political interests do that. Oil in another country which has, for America, is in the Middle East, does that. There are political interests in beginning war. Us seeing soldiers as heroes is not that important in the eyes of the politicians. We don't believe this is actually true, right? Otherwise, we can use, fear-mongering, other ways to get people invested into war. And again, as we've said for this entire debate, being positive about war is not really the same or connected about being positive and believing that the people who have sacrificed their lives are heroes, right? This is not true. We see this in many historical occasions, right? We see this in Vietnam, where the soldiers were not blamed for the atrocities that would happen, right? So we don't see an inherent connection here. Therefore, we also don't see the political talking points of politicians as being an inherent connection to the heroic narrative that we have in society, right? We see this as many other and different reasons. And again, we say, why don't these people deserve to be looked after in society, right? What they're saying is literally attention in their case, right? They're in one hand saying, right, these people don't get enough attention, medical attention, societal attention, they're being otherized by society. And then on the other hand, they have the audacity to say that it's not justified or that they're not getting it, and then the other hand, they're saying that politics only uses those narratives and to help them, right? Makes no sense. You can't have it both ways, right? They are taken care of. I'm sorry, not making complete sense. But the point is, they're essentially saying that, one, we're giving them too much attention, but most of their cases, how we're not giving them enough attention. And that is not true, right? We believe that with this hero narrative, they are actually being given attention. And we don't see how this is such a monumental, yes.
Please deal with how the hero narrative opens itself up to abuse, e.g. post-war conflicts, lack of resolution, e.g. suicide, bombing,
let's
terrorism.
go, right? As Ivan said, right, we believe that the hero narrative, and what was my third point, is exactly what tries to at least mitigate the things that happen in war. Look, we can't say in complete, radical sides either way. Yes, atrocities do happen in war, right? But we believe when these people are perceived as killing machines, that is how they're going to act, right? When we don't put a standard on them. And exactly because of your own, metrics, right? Because this is an identity. And the hero identity isn't only, I go with the military. The hero identity is also I do good things. I act in a certain way. I act with honor in military, right? Because they self-identify with this, they are more likely to act in a way that is appropriate in those situations than in a way, for instance, causing war crimes and problems in that case, right? We need honor in war, and the only way we can get that is putting this pressure on soldiers, right? This is the most important part of today's debate, right? What is war like on their side and what is war like on our side, right? On their side, when we, abandon this narrative, right? We say, wars are still going to happen, right? Because there's 1,000 different interests in war to happen. Sadly, we live in such a world. But what happens in this case, right? The soldiers going into that war are already perceived as killing machines, as nothing more than a gun that is going to kill people, right? They don't have the standard they have to live up to. They don't have to, make sure that they're acting in an appropriate way, right? These people have no checks and balances. They don't identify with the hero narrative. That is why they do not have this honor that is better in today's world, right? We believe that there are atrocities today, we agree. But we think there are much less atrocities, exactly because society pressures soldiers to act in a certain honorable and heroic way towards the civilians in those places. And that is why we believe that is much better in today's society than it would be as an alternative. Because we believe that it is justified that we have this perception of them as heroes because they sacrificed their lives, they sacrificed a lot for the safety of many people. And because in the alternative way, they would act not heroically, and we don't want that at war, we oppose this motion.
Okay. Thank you very much, debaters. If you please here because the colleagues will join you in a moment. Okay. Just a few points. We still have a few moments, a few minutes time. Virginia Woolf would have sided with the government, of course. Maybe she would not have agreed with everything you had to say, but she would have been there. Anyway, and you've stirred a lot of emotion here and probably probably caused a degree of confusion as well. Now's the time to clarify that. Maybe you'd like to, because this is an important question. What is war like on their side? What is war like on our side? Which side on which side do you prefer the picture of the war that you've just been painted? I would just, by the way, like to thank our colleague, for this semester. He was here from the States, and he just happened to, he said that, and he borne it, he was rather brave, wasn't he? With all the accusations and all the criticism that he had to lay at their door. Anyway, thank you. But he did say that this sort of motion would not be possible in the States. That they would refrain from phrasing it this way. So is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? That we at least have a conversation on such grounds? Anyway, enough said. The floor is yours. Questions, comments, welcome. T-shirts included. Maybe you can start.
So, yeah. Okay. Any thoughts, any comments? Anyone?
No?
Because if we generally think about how war would look on our side as opposed to on their side, I don't know if I can speak for everyone here, but I generally don't consider myself a hero, and I've managed to kill literally 0 children. Or people, indeed. So, I don't think... So far, yeah. I am a teacher, so we'll see how it goes. But I generally don't think that not actively murdering children is as strongly tied to heroism as Ivan might have made it seem. Wouldn't you agree?
He would oppose now. He would oppose you, wouldn't he?
He would, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't suggest that, did he? He did. Killing children is a heroic action.
No, heroism is the only thing stopping you from actively murdering.
Sorry.
Well, I think to an extent it is, right? Because
He managed to brainwash us.
yes, no, it's because you are in a specific situation where violence is required and where you are expected to not act in a way a human would. This lowers inhibitions through what you have, like that you had earlier, and obviously it would be easier to make actions that are abhorrent if you don't have a standard that you're subjected to. Moreover, if you don't have the idea that soldiers are heroes, then normal people are less likely to join the military. People that do join the military are those who don't need to be identified as heroes. People who already don't feel that abhorrent actions are something, bad. People that just literally want to go and shoot. Yes.
Yep.
Or don't have enough money to support their families.
Or that.
Yeah.
Hashtag America.
One of the arguments that you guys gave about having honor be a sort of way that the soldiers should act during wartime, it felt a bit flimsy for me, since you could say that honor is somewhat relative if you talk about different areas. So, for example, honor can be actually honorable for, I'm not going to mention the Americans, but maybe for but you could say that, for example, jihadists, they have the narrative that strapping a bomb to yourself, going to a city center and killing yourself along with a lot of innocent people is also honorable. So I feel like that's why that argument can be a bit funny.
Yeah, obviously that's something that you will need to tackle in opposition. However, in a competitive debate, this probably wouldn't be an issue because they couldn't win on the worst case radical example, 1% of people scenario.
Also, it's yeah, sure, but what if they had 0 concept of anything that was honorable? How would they act then?
I'm not saying that they shouldn't have any sort of margin, but I'm saying that just using the concrete argument that
That's a fair comment.
Because you could say that if everyone had the same honor system, you could say maybe that could lead to almost no war, but that's not the case, since a lot of wars are led because of ideological matters, and if you have the same ideology, you might have the same honor system, but that's not the case, as I mentioned with the jihadists, so that's still...
Yeah, but that still doesn't apply to government as well when they say, yeah, but you have the law of war and stuff like that, because they're also not abiding by that set of rules, right? So they're outside of any sort of system that is conceptualized by the military or by war, like itself. I think.
And also, it's hard to define them as soldiers necessarily. And this is a narrative
I mean,
debate.
they define themselves as soldiers.
Yeah.
That's fair. But
I can also identify myself as that. I don't know.
Okay, yes, you can. But like it's a narrative debate, right? So you look at what narrative exists in society, and the narrative is of probably governmental soldiers as being heroes, and this narrative isn't even present that much in Europe as it is in America, for instance. So it's more of that narrative. So, okay.
Yeah, and so following on that question, that comment, coming from a culture that has both a very strong sort of narrative of soldiers as heroes, and also has a very extensive history of military engagement. Like it's hard for me to imagine a time when the U.S. has not imagine, but recall moments of peace where we have not been involved in some sort of war. I'm wondering, what relationship do you see between the hero narrative and that sort of continual war? Like, do you think that the continual wars create narratives of heroes, or the narratives of heroes feed into like perpetuating wars, or do these seem sort of like independent variables?
I don't honestly think they're separate, even though I said this quickly.
Even like war generally happens for either political or religious or like economic reasons.
And
I don't think that leaders go, oh, we want to show that our soldiers are the best soldiers, let's go shoot people, right? I don't think this is the logical process that they make unless...
Although
I think it's used for justifying war to some
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah.
And I think in America, which has such a weak national, not weak national identity, but not one that is based in the traditional nationality building system, and it needs something that is like a cohesive element and something for them to strongly identify with. And because America is such it's a hegemon that constantly bombs people, that is the military. So I think it's a cohesion.
On that point, I would also say that like the hero narrative moving away from like America, it's a point that I was trying to make but like sort of ran out of time was the point is I think the hero narrative again is very much defined by where in space and time you are, and very much defined by the winner of a certain conflict. Now this doesn't necessarily apply that much to like international conflicts, but like certain civil war situations are very much a thing, right? So like post World War II Yugoslavia, like partisans, yay, but like they also did some crappy things.
But we're not gonna talk about
But
that.
like because of this narrative set by the winners of like the untouchable hero that fights for freedom, you couldn't have any sort of open discussion about what actually happened, right? So to this day, you still don't have closure on those issues. You still have people on both sides trying to like redefine history and who have like these generational hurts still going.
What I think that heroism as an identity of soldiers bring to war is some sort of legitimacy to the soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
If we accept war as something we have to have, as some perpetual thing that has to happen, which is not something I think we would be comfortable doing, but let's say we do. It's good that our soldiers, or soldiers as a general, are seen as legitimate actors of the state. Because generally in Slovenia we don't see them as heroes. Would you trust a soldier? Depends, right?
I mean, if they need to like pick
If
up
I-
spare wood from the woods, then like
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
like
I would generally not
Otherwise,
leave
no.
them alone with my nephew. But if I see soldiers as heroes, I instinctively trust them. So if a state has to have an army to be a valid state, it makes sense that that army is trusted, is legitimate. And I think that status of heroism kind of does that.
and
Which
to,
is another line you guys could have
I
gone
wanted
for.
to have that.
But
You
you-
said it was irrelevant.
and to a certain extent, I feel like it's also needed in order to keep that military going, because
Yeah.
like it is a very different profession. If you're in ongoing wars, and if you say that wars will happen and that you need to have a military, it's certainly necessary, I think, and like an organic thing that happens, because it is so much different, right? The job is so much different than like teachers or like, I mean, fine, okay, but like teachers or like nurses or lawyers or whatever, right? What?
Name a job.
Name a job.
How would you guys deal with hating the war but supporting the troops?
I just have a comment maybe about the concept of heroism. I feel like the two sides went for two different concepts. For example, proposition, you were talking about the society seeing soldiers as heroes, and then the opposition, and basically even speech, was all about the honor, so the sort of internal view of a person as a hero, which is, I don't think, the same thing. So did you see the difference when you were preparing, or?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference, but I don't think it's that large. Because in my speech, I also kind of talk about what happens if you see that clash in yourself. Like, I don't consider myself a hero, but every soldier I know is a hero, is supposed to be a hero, so am I a hero? This dilemma you have. They decided to go for how an individual sees themselves, because honestly, it's easier for their side to talk about it, right? If I would just go with, we would just have to go 3 speeches of this brings mental breakdown. They have a valid point on their side. So it's different aspects of how you look at the debate.
So my question is more like personally to you guys. Do you think like it is necessary to have the concept of heroism to keep people having those jobs, like keep people like what's the word? Like applying to like be? Do you think it is like necessary in order to keep an army there?
I mean, look, there's always gonna be people who just want to have a steady job and go there. There's also people that like want to shoot babies that are gonna go there. However, I do think that there is a margin of people that want to do something that they perceive as worthwhile for the society, and so, like something that they consider is to be upholding the society, whatever. And I do think that the concept of heroism is needed for those people. But I do think that military could be sustained without it. Yeah.
I think it certainly helps in gaining
Yeah.
more people applying. Okay, like obviously in times of like imminent war, you have drafts and things like that, and you also have soldiers who mostly apply because they're from like lower income households or are like applying for permanent citizenship or seeking benefits that they necessarily wouldn't necessarily have access to. So that's a large portion. But I certainly think you top it up with this sort of fetishization of the military, this boyish fantasy of like I'm going off to be honorable and a hero and protect my land from the evil other people.
Everybody wants to feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
And also the status in society, I think you have is pretty bit. I mean, the trust and the position in society, seen as a respectable and legitimate actor, is probably also good and enjoyable for people.
It's a fairly simple way to get to a certain level of status in society.
Can I ask something? You mentioned about people wanting to shoot babies. Can I just don't the people who apply for the military have to go through some mental like psychological evaluation? So I don't think that wanting to shoot babies goes under that's what we want from people who go into the military.
That the system is foolproof, essentially.
But we're going to go
But
with
still,
a metaphorical.
but the psychological evaluation is still there. Like from what I so.
But
Let's say you're
okay, so all evaluations in the army are passable.
Yes.
My father is colorblind, right? When he went into the army, they basically showed him this and said, "What color is this?" It's blue. Okay, you're fine. And he went up to be like a sergeant. So
there isn't
everything is
level
possible.
to be upheld.
Also, I think it's the situation. I mean, like, sure, I don't think most Germans in the time of the Second World War were batshit insane, but huge amounts of war atrocities happen because in war where you are, it's the banality of evil to some extent, right? Also, I mean, you're in a situation where you're completely dehumanized and the people you're shooting are no longer human to you. And I don't think a checkbox medical examination is going to prevent from people going insane. On the other hand, like we were trying to say, is seeing yourself as a hero and someone who has to live up to some sort of standard might prevent you more so than the circumstances like this. Okay. So, and also shooting babies is more of like an illustration. You know, we're not completely serious.
Yeah.
So if I may use another quote from pop culture, could what you're saying so people in so men in the military, people in the military, soldiers, they pass the psychological evaluations per se, but then when they get out of the fields, according to Game of Thrones, inside every man is a beast and he stirs when you put a sword in his hand. So in the environment they're in, everything changes, their values change, and then things happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different situation than the, psychologist's office with a couch. You don't have.
I mean, yeah, like certainly under extreme circumstances, I think like your sort of barometer for normalcy and acceptability is gone or at least shifted to a significant degree.
You're doing a job where you have to shoot at people.
Yeah.
I don't think a large level of mental sanity could be upheld at that point.
I think it's also has to do with like the training where like the training where they're systematically told that the way you brush your teeth is wrong, the way you make your bed is wrong, right? Sort of helps to make this cognitive dissonance wherein you can at the same time live in your own society but are also able to perform these deeds.
I had a problem with the whole debate just tying being a hero or heroism to killing people. And I do understand, okay, if you're in immediate danger and you're trying to protect yourself, someone's killing you, you are a hero for preventing that from happening. But I just can't wrap my head around perceiving someone who has essentially become a killing machine as a hero because he uses his hands to kill people. I mean, it's just, I guess it's the fact that I don't live in a country where violence is idealized as in, I don't know, perhaps other countries, because it's very hard for me to perceive a soldier as a hero because he killed someone for our country. I think it has to do with the narrative that you need to spin in order to get some. Also, the comment where you said people who seek validation or gratitude or being perceived as heroes don't usually sign up to the military. I find a lot of issues with that because there are things as moral or hero complexes, and I do think that a lot of people could fit into that category when they choose a high-risk job as going into the military. You are where also you use the argument that people need to be to have this narration of you're going to be perceived as a hero if you do this, so maybe applying for this job will finally give you some sort of validation. Like, I know I'm not making a lot of sense right now, it's just that
the first thing you said, I don't think we were necessarily the concept of heroism is tied to killing people, it's tied to the military, which kills people.
Trying to tie it to someone who
Yeah, but that's cultural, right?
That's
because
the
if you
narrative.
lived in a country that portrayed, I don't know, every Muslim country as an existential threat to your freedom and to your security and to your children, surely you would perceive the people who are fighting this threat as someone who is doing something good for you, as someone who's heroic.
Well, in that case, the exterminator in Australia is a fucking hero because he kills the snake
Yes,
in my,
yes.
my
Yes.
toilet, and I see him more as a hero than someone who actively goes into war, especially given the history of wars where a lot of them were not.
The narrative doesn't mean personal opinion, I mean personal perception, right? Because I also don't perceive soldiers.
Yeah, I think at this point it's important to clarify what I forgot to say before the debate. This does not represent necessarily what we actually think about life in general, right?
Or in fact, at all.
Okay, at this point I should perhaps acknowledge a level of restlessness that is perceptible, and also the levels of oxygen have dropped dramatically. So let's give a big round of applause to